All right, well, here we are. We're 1 minute before the hour. So let's go ahead. Let's see if any people are going to join us. And then I can, I hope that they pull them in correctly. Why do I want to just try this one more time and see if I can't get it there? See, it's not, this app is still in development mode. What? It wasn't Tuesday. Why is it, or it wasn't Wednesday? Why is it on Friday? That way.
Oh, technology.
We do hate technology, don't we? We love it when it works. We hate it when it doesn't. All right. So let me introduce everyone. I'm Lynn Davison, your adulting coach, and it is my pleasure to bring to you an author, the co-author of Flexible Mindsets in Schools, which I read by substituting the word schools with at home, and parents for teachers and young adults for learners, and got so much out of it. This is something that we all need to develop in ourselves, and we certainly see that that flexible mindsets will definitely serve our autistic young adults. So thank you so much, Susannah, and I can't wait to learn more from you today.
And thank you so much for inviting me. And also thank you for being so flexible in your ability to switch out schools and teachers and students, because I think you're absolutely right. Flexible mindsets can benefit us all. So.
Yes, yes. And I appreciate your advocacy in the area of equity, because having raised now 6 children, I can see, and several of we have Black grandchildren, we have Hispanic children, we have white, we have all of that, and the impact of race and disability is pretty impressive. So I appreciate your advocacy in that area in the schools as well.
Yeah, we felt it was really important when looking at something like flexible mindsets that can seem like it's an extra, or it can seem like it's only for those who have the brain space and ability. And yet what we would argue is it's the complete opposite. If we truly want to have equitable schools and everybody being able to have the same access to the future they want for themselves, it's absolutely critical that we equal this playing field. And flexible mindsets is one of the ways we can do this, for sure.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Because the way we've always done it isn't always working for everyone. And that's my mission, is to do my part to build a world that works for everyone. And so I think we're absolutely aligned together, and can't wait to level up my skills, because they could use some work. So the questions that we have had submitted already is, what can we do or say to autistic young adults to help them believe in flexible mindsets?
Yeah, and this is, in terms of, this gives us a nice big picture way to start this conversation, because I think we tend to think, especially when we're working with people on the spectrum, of rigid thinking versus flexible thinking. And it absolutely is not an either or situation. There are many, many situations where more logical, methodical, even rigid types of thinking become incredibly valuable and are a real strength.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know, especially when we're looking at creativity, when we're looking at social dynamic relationships, really any dynamic situation in life, that a flexible mindset is going to be the beneficial mindset to have in that situation. So what's really important is that when we look at that metacognitive piece of which when I say metacognition, I'm referring to self-awareness and an understanding of your own thinking. It's being able to know which situation would it be more beneficial to be more methodical and logical and use that part of my brain, and when would it be more beneficial to think of some flexible strategies and to work in a different way. So I think for starting to help people on the spectrum to understand more about a flexible mindset, we have in our book a spiral of reflective learning, and I'll probably refer to this several times because I feel like it's kind of like a little roadmap for how to build any new skill or new mindset, a new way of doing things. And that is to start simply by being a model. And we learn so much through actions, way more than we're going to learn through our verbal communication. So when you demonstrate a flexible mindset and you pair that, this is the piece that I think there's many people out there who are absolutely demonstrating a flexible mindset. But what we would suggest is that you pair that with actually noticing and explicitly sharing that, that kind of self-talk that, oh, I'm choosing to do it this way, or I could have done it this way, but I'm also going to think about doing it this way. The more we can kind of do talk alouds and share what's going on in our thinking. How am I being flexible right now? And then also, not only how am I being flexible right now, but the reflection piece after is also really key in terms of, well, now that I was flexible, here's the benefit that I got from being flexible, rather than just looking at it this one way or choosing not to do it. And the more that we ourselves can start by modeling that and sharing that thinking process, both before, during, and after we are using our flexible thinking, the more it becomes something that you can start to see for yourself. Oh, I see where this applies, and then you can start to help. Sometimes with when you have difficulty being self-reflective, what you can do is you can notice for people. Oh, I just noticed that when you did that, that was being flexible. And it's amazing. I used to, when I was working with students on the spectrum, that was something I did on a regular basis in our sessions. Even the smallest little thing they did that was flexible, I was like, you were just flexible. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, what did that feel like? So that they get to
So you connect their body.
Yes.
Them in their bodies. Wonderful. So you're getting all the senses involved.
Exactly. And that's where it's going to stick.
Right? How does that feel inside? Oh, so good.
Because if you just continue to use the words, they just go in one ear and out the other, unfortunately. But when we can connect it to a felt experience and start to realize, oh, sometimes, and it doesn't always feel good to be flexible, but often I found that the response when I said, oh, what was that like when you just thought about another way to try that? They did feel a little calmer, or they did have a little, excitement, or something positive would be communicated back. So I think that's one way to start to just notice what's already happening, highlight and be more explicit with our language. So it's kind of that you'll hear me say often, starting with the modeling, your own self-awareness with those talk alouds, start to notice and name positive actions, first of all, for what they're doing that is flexible and demonstrating a flexible mindset. And then once you've got that started, you can also start to name some of the things that aren't helping them to be flexible, because we know there's going to be many of those. But we need to have a nervous system that can hear those things before we start to say, so this is getting in the way of you having a flexible mindset. What I'm noticing is that when this happens, I notice that you get really thinking that there's only one way to do this, or whatever, whatever the situation might be. So that's kind of like a 3-step way to build that idea of a flexible mindset and how it might be beneficial to a person.
So it's not only modeling, but talking aloud also, then noticing the positive actions that they're taking and asking them, what was that like? And then, which is great because it ties and then naming the things that aren't helping them be flexible. Yes. So good. I grabbed your illustration from the Kindle version of your book that I bought, and there it is. That's that spiral of reflection. And that's why you've got to get the book, because it gives you much more than what we can cover in an hour. It's a chewy, delicious book. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
And that spiral, although, like you said, it is related to educators, but if you were to look at it, it's at the end of every chapter for the first 5 chapters.
Yes.
There are questions that go along with that, or reflections and what that might sound like and how you might model. And I think for the most part, although it is specific to the classroom, I think, as you noted, you could
Yeah.
definitely see how you can be as a parent or a coach, how you could be metacognitive, how you could model, how you could share so that those things are highlighted together, how you the springboarding is definitely something you can do just one-on-one even. And then always as a parent and a coach, you're always thinking on your feet. And that's just looking for those opportunities. When can I very quickly just, oh, I just noticed you be flexible, or I just noticed that this was something we want more of, that's really going to help you to be more flexible. So all of those things can apply to different people.
Yeah, I love this. And I love your idea too, your concept of, let me get there I am again, of how there's on one side of it, the rigid, on the other side, the flexible. And if we can start out kind of in the middle and decide which direction would work best for us, that's when we're really demonstrating that flexible mindset. Yeah. So
well, obviously that's the end goal, and we're always going to work somewhere in between, but it's as always, it's about having the self-awareness.
Having that self-awareness. Yeah. And speaking of, that's the next question. How do we help them become aware of their own thinking?
I think I just may have overlapped those questions really well. Because, as I said, I do feel like metacognition in a flexible mindset, which I think that question is coming up, so I don't want to go too much into my next question again, but in a flexible mindset, it is the combination of metacognition, which is self-awareness, along with the I can messages, along with executive function strategies. Those three pillars are what build a flexible mindset. And it's when we're interacting with those three things. So self-awareness is the first piece of that puzzle, because we're not going to want to change or do things differently if we're not even aware of where we are now and where we want to go. So it really has to begin with an awareness of, oh, this is what I'm doing right now. I would like it to be different. So again, for people on the spectrum, which I think some of the questions were alluding to this, that we often find that students on the spectrum, they're not really open and wanting to do things differently. And that's the fundamental problem. So in that case, what I would suggest is that, again, modeling yours in your own life, until we see a benefit to doing something differently, we're not going to do it.
No.
So if you can start showing in your own life and explaining, oh, I just decided that I was going to try this in a couple of different ways, and look what I just figured out. It was so cool. I just found another way to make this, Lego strut, whatever. I'm thinking of young kids. I'm actually should make it a little bit older, but I just figured out another way to make this thing work. It was so cool. And getting excited about doing things differently and recognizing that, until we as individuals think there's a reason and that we have some desire, there is something I want over there, we're not going to actually be open. So it does need to start by just in your own environment and modeling it and highlighting it and celebrating all of those things that you're recognizing we want more of for this individual, because we know their life will be more fulfilling. We know that they would be happier. We know that this is something that's going to benefit them lifelong if we can just help them to build it now. And also recognizing that is a slower process. That's not going to happen quickly, but it can definitely, when we start to find ways when we look at things through a flexible mindset, we can start to see it everywhere we go and everything we do. I notice now, I'm constantly just noticing when people are demonstrating flexible mindset, when people are doing things that are really helping them to be creative and look at things in different ways and to be critical in their thinking. I just notice it and point it out, and that really helps to build the motivation for it.
And that's why I believe that the parents are the best coach for their kids, because they're around to notice when that's happening. They have the continuity over years that teachers don't have the advantage of, so that we can notice, well, look at where you were 5 years ago and look at where you are now. It's amazing how much more flexible you've become. Look how you solved this problem. Look how you're structuring your life the way you want to. That's why the parents are really the ones that can help this process, and that's why they're so involved in our course. And the way that we teach metacognition, and just the first step is we just encourage thought downloads. We just want them to do a brain dump of what's happening in their mind. And the way that we tie that to something that's important to them is we look at their life GPS in the 10 domains, and we ask them, where are the results in your life, not where you want them to be? And that's where we start, is right where they care the most. Not where the parent cares the most, because it's just not going to be the place. It could be. I mean, there could be a nice overlap, which is lovely, but often we don't even know where they're dissatisfied with their life because we've never taken we haven't gone through the process of documenting what they want, and then what they want next, what they've created and what they want next, and then where the gaps are. So that's how we weave it into the coaching that we do at the Art of Adulting. So, I mean, this was your next one, which ties into what you've been saying. How do we help them notice their feelings?
It absolutely, I mean, I think those 3 steps still apply. However, so the 3 steps being to model how you're feeling and to be explicit and talk aloud. This is how I'm feeling. This happened and this made me feel this. And then also then to notice and name their feelings, and then positive feelings and emotions, and then move to the negative ones when they're have a bit more. But I think the additional piece I would say for that one, and we're getting in a place where schools are doing a little bit more social and emotional education.
Yes, they are.
It still is, again, like you noted, it happens so much in the home that I think we're always going to need to have an emotion vocabulary for home as well. And I think this really starts with an education in feelings, to just be talking about your feelings and connecting that to, how you feel because of what happened. Those are great things to point out. But if a person themselves does not have a feeling vocabulary, if they don't understand emotions, and early education really starts with looking at facial expressions and what is that communicating, body language, and what is that communicating. That kind of learning needs to happen first before we can start to expect anyone to be able to do that for themselves. I think it would be great, and we argue in the book that, teaching of social and emotional skills and being really explicit with that throughout education at all different levels, because those feeling vocabulary, that changes as we grow and as we get older. The complexity and the dynamics that are required to be in tune with how you're feeling and how you would manage them. The strategies change throughout our lifetime.
So this is the emotional sensation wheel that we use in our course, and it has those 6 main emotions, which I think most of our people are comfortable with identifying the 6 main ones, but these ones out here, these nuanced ones, are really hard. What I like about this particular wheel is that it includes the sensations in the body on the outside. So sometimes we go from the sensation in the body in to find the word that describes the emotion best. But I don't expect anything better than the 6 in the middle. And sometimes it's uncomfortable or comfortable, high energy, low energy. And that's as far as we need to go, because then we know where we are in terms of our, where we are in those 4 quadrants. Helps us know if we need to readjust, if we need to notice. Well, we just need to notice that.
Yeah. In terms of self-regulation, you're right, that essentially that's all you need to know is, and again, I think this is going to come up with a question coming up, so I won't get into it at this moment, but being able to identify what quadrant you're in can really help for this situation, do I need to adjust? And that's the dynamic part of that. None is good, none is bad. But you need to know, is this the right amount for this particular situation and experience that I'm having right now? And how do I change it if it's not?
Yes. And often it's just by breathing. I mean, there's a reason why they teach that at the ashrams in India and have for the last, thousands of years, is the breath is the first thing they teach. And often that is the best way to decelerate us. So that's so good. I love all those pointers. Boy, we really need them in our home. So what questions can we ask to encourage I can thoughts?
So the I can messages in flexible mindsets, that's that second pillar. So first we need to become aware of, who we are as a learner and how we're thinking. And then obviously, one of the things that I realize in working with students is that we can be aware, but if there isn't that desire to be able to do things differently, to be able to persevere and stick with things, we're not going anywhere.
No.
So the I can messages, one of the most important things about them, first of all, is you're thinking about any empowering question is going to be an I can message. So questioning and curiosity are kind of core to a flexible mindset. They stimulate the brain in a way that no other strategy will ever do. And when you ask a student an empowering question, what you're doing is you're giving that person agency to figure out for themselves what they think and how they feel. And what is important, I think, we especially growth mindset is something that's very familiar in, there's lots of research to back it. Carol Dweck has done such amazing work in that field, and that a growth mindset is great. But what a flexible mindset does is it really takes it one step further, because it's not only that we need to appreciate that, yes, we can get smarter, that yes, we have agency in our own lives, but it's also recognizing that we can take the power out of some of those negative emotions that we sometimes feel around not knowing and, make mistakes and when things don't go as planned. So when we start to spend time also normalizing not knowing for students, when we start to really encourage a trial and error approach to how we learn,
let's do an
what
experiment.
we're doing. Yeah, what we're doing is we're taking out the judgment. We're saying everything you do in life is just data, and we can choose what we want to do with that data. What that data can help us figure out what's working and what's not working. And we encourage in schools, but this would be great. It's great at home for a parent as well, to simply, when I have a student who says, I don't know, I'm like, yes, you don't know, because guess what? That's where learning happens. Learning doesn't happen when we already know what to do.
Thank
So
you for that.
let's get excited. Let's go, yes, yay, now we're in the right spot. We're in a place where we can figure something out. This is cool. Let's figure this out. And so we encourage an experiment in a class, for teachers in a classroom, where we try and get them to do that. Like, put up your hand if you don't know the answer. And then we're like, yes, you were brave enough to identify that. I mean, at some point, I would love that there was nothing brave about admitting you didn't know something, because like I said, this is where the magic happens.
Yes.
It's in the not knowing, and removing that judgment, removing that fear that, oh my gosh, if I speak up right now, I might not have the right answer. That's a risk. I'm not going to take it. I don't want to fail. We don't want people to be feeling like not knowing is scary in any way, because what happens when we're scared, our nervous systems just go into overdrive. We go into the fight, flight, freeze, and we shut down the resources in our brain to be able to access and to learn. And so it's really counterproductive to have any of that negativity associated. So I love the idea at home of encouraging the trial and error approach. When somebody wants to figure something out, oh, let's figure this out together. And then whatever information you get, we're having a science experiment here. When we do science experiments, no one ever is upset. Well, I shouldn't say, sometimes you don't like the results you get, but there's no judgment. They're not good or bad. They're just information. And they tell us more about what we were trying to explore. So I think that approach, combined with, making sure that we're asking lots of empowering questions of students so that they feel more in charge of themselves and their own learning, that yes, you can do this. You can get smarter, you can build more neural pathways, we can get blood flow going to all parts of your brain. This is all possible. And in addition, let's not have so much fear around not knowing, and let's just approach things in a trial and error way so that you can figure things out and see what works and doesn't work without the emotion.
That requires me as a parent to let go of the thought that I know what's best for my child, especially when they're young adults. I need to be able to say, this may be what worked for me, but I don't know if it's going to work for you. So let me offer you some suggestions, but it's truly up to you which you pick up and do the actions on. And I'm willing to be wrong about what the best way is, because you're the expert in your life and you know what's going to work for you. So let's do those experiments to figure out just exactly what that is. You know, is it better for you to go to school full time? Is it better for you to take a class and work? Is it better for you to just work? You know that better than I do, where you are in your thinking and what seems to be working best for you. So I no longer have to be the autocratic expert. I can be the coach. I can step into the coach role of, let me just help you with, maybe I know some things that I've learned over the years, but you're the one that's the expert in your life.
And even again, when you are saying those things, being as explicit to, as you just said, I may be wrong, and that's totally fine. I don't mind at all. That means that you just figured out something new about you that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
So again, you know, you're thinking that in your head, but we don't always say it out loud.
I know.
And can't assume that people are picking up on those nuances. They're not. Those are subtle things. Those are messages that need to be said out loud as often as possible.
Especially with our kids who don't necessarily pick up on the nonverbal cues as quickly. I mean, they just don't. That's the way their brain got wired. So that's where we have to put the data out there so that you know what our thoughts are out there so that they know.
Exactly.
The tool we use often is the steer map for that. That's where we look at the situation. I like to use my hand because the situation is outside of our control over here, but it's our thoughts, emotions, actions, and results that are in our control. So as long as we understand that this isn't going to change, we don't have the power to change that, but we have the power to change our thoughts, which are going to influence our emotions, which will flavor our actions and create our results. We can do that ourselves. So let's look at those and see what's happening. That STEAR map is what we use as the tool to, you know, slow things down and pull them apart by putting them into those categories and making our discussions visual by putting them on their life GPS in their steer map sheet, on their life worksheet. And we write down, you know, what has been happening, and okay, what else has been happening, and all right, what's the next thing that's been happening? Okay, now what do you want to, how do you want to feel about it, or what result do you want to create? And then we fill in that steer map so that they get an idea of what a possible other thought might be that would work better for them. And it's them generating it and putting it into their steer map, typing it in, so that they are actively involved in noticing what's going on and what that's creating for them. So that's the tool that we use to move, you know, just tiny changes in that little steering wheel, you know, just tiny changes. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah, and I love that it's visual, and you know, it actually, you can use your hand to kind of guide that process. That combination is really powerful.
It is. It's really made a difference in terms of the response discipline that several of my longer term students are noticing that they are able to have. They're able to pause enough to say, okay, that's what's happening. I can't change it. And let me decide between this space and this space, how I'm going to think about it. It's wonderful to see. So it's a great tool. Yeah, for the parents as well. So the next question we have here is, what helps the most to help executive functioning? Is it writing thoughts down? What is it?
So this is interesting. So if you think of executive functions, I know it's such a fancy title, but I like to just simplify it and say, you know, basically, if executive function is all about getting stuff done. So it's our ability to identify a goal, or like, what do we want to do? What do we already have that we can use to figure this out, and then make it happen? And, you know, I simplify it. And then of course, what we know is that executive function processes are, you know, they're intricate. There's many of them, and they're all working, you know, crazily behind the scenes together in order to help you figure out what you need to do, use what you already know, and make it happen. So, but if your goal is to get stuff done, if that's what we're working to build, yes, I will say that writing things down can be helpful. And I'm a particularly huge fan of, you know, my to-do lists and, you know, my checklists and all of those things. They're great. But what I want to say about that and is that, and we promote this in the book as well, is that there is no one right strategy that is right for everybody.
No.
And so, you know, of course, we all want, it's easier when there's a recipe, but there is no recipe when it comes to executive function because they're just too complex.
Too many
What
variables. Mhm.
There's too many variables, and every single person in every situation, you know, is a little bit different. Now, having said that, what I want to say is that there is one foundational piece that I have found in many students with executive function challenges that does tend to be much weaker and is an area that we could put a lot more effort and support into, intervention into, which is visualizing. Now, when I
Yes.
say visualizing, it's creating mental anchors in our life. We found through research, and a lot of this work I've learned through a speech and language pathologist, Sarah Ward. But
Yes.
one of the things that I do notice that I'm constantly supporting my students to try and build, in order to be able to move through this world and across time, and to be able to, you know, things don't happen in the moment. So if you're trying to accomplish something, time is involved. And what we notice with people with weak executive function is that they're not thinking of the future in terms of visualizing it. They may say, I want this, you know, in the future, but what they're not doing is then creating a picture in their mind of what does that look like? What does somebody who is, you know, successfully working at the grocery store, what are they doing? They're not picturing what that looks like, and they're not necessary. And in order to move through time, we need to be able to hold a picture in our mind of, this is where I am, this is where I'm, you know, my next step, these are the steps, and visualizing it. This can be done in the moment, like with young children, you know, when you hear them saying, well, you know, are you ready for school? Do you have everything ready for school?
Yeah.
And they're like, and you're like, but you didn't brush your teeth, but your gym shoes aren't in the bag. Your lunch bag is still sitting on the counter. And they're like, oh yeah, because they heard get ready for school. Well, those are just words.
Yes.
But if we help people to think,
image.
what does going to school require? Oh yes, I have gym today. I'm going to go, I need my lunch because I'm going to have lunch. I need my backpack, and that's at the door. If we're picturing ourselves moving through time and space, it really helps us to ground us and hold those pieces together that are all so complex, that require so much of our thinking. And images have been with us forever, whereas words have just been a small part of our evolutionary history. And so those images can be just so powerful for the brain. It's less stress on the brain to hold on to the visual of what I'm doing and where I'm going. And it doesn't just disappear in one ear and out the other. It's not gone. You can hold, some people can hold a movie in their mind forever. They know exactly the sequence of the movie and where it went, because the images are just so powerful for our brain. So I do feel like at any age, no matter what you're trying to accomplish, whatever you're trying to get done, if you can be visualizing, starting with, this is what I want done. I want this essay written. I want to be successful in this job, whatever your goal is. And then if you think about those steps that you're breaking down, how am I going to get to that end goal? I know that in my essay, it's got an introduction, it's got 3 body paragraphs, and it's got a conclusion, and it's got to be typed, and it's got to be double spaced. And, you're picturing that end product. And then we move backwards and we start. So now what do I need to do? And holding that end goal in mind visually, it provides that mental anchor to keep us moving along the path, instead of just being, oh, what am I supposed to be doing right now? And where am I? So that is a skill that I think we do not spend enough time on. And yes, some of us do it naturally, but a lot of people do not do that naturally. And it's not something that you can just say, oh, just make visuals. We really need to break that down and help students and young adults even, to be able to, what does that look like in my life, and how can I do that?
I love that, because that calls it mimetic ideation, right? Lovely term. I think that's so good, because you need a resume. Picture a resume. You need a cover letter or an email to send with your resume. What does that look like? And okay, you may need to go to the place where you're in, where you're interested, and actually physically bring them a resume, because so much is done electronically now. If you can make an impression in person, and so you picture yourself going to the place where you want to have the job. Those are the types of things that our young adults need to practice creating over and over again, so it becomes easier and easier every time.
Yeah, and a lot of us do it subconsciously, and again, that's about making it explicit. Before I leave the house in the morning, I pick my day and I go, oh, I have that meeting, so then I need that piece of paper. I'm going out for lunch, so I don't need my lunch box today. I'm going to the gym after work, I'm going to need my gym bag. Like, I do that before I leave the door. I don't think about it, and I don't even realize, but I actually am visualizing my day before I leave, so that I make sure I have everything I need and I'm on track.
And in so many cases, that's a more difficult thing that just doesn't come naturally for people who have autistic brains. So we need to put the supports in place to make that happen, so that it will happen more naturally as time goes by. Yeah. So the next question it looks like we have here is how to help our autistic young adults feel safe to puzzle and grapple.
Yes.
I love that word, grapple and puzzle. So, chewy delicious. Yeah.
I love that you love them, because so do I. Yeah. Grapple has become one of my favorites, just because I have found such richness in learning more about grappling and figuring out for myself, how can I grapple more? Because there is so much fulfillment that comes from grappling. And I love this question, because it is not something that you can just will yourself to have. It is, puzzling and grappling. So we call it productive puzzling as the big picture, in terms of it's like the mechanism for building a flexible mindset, is being able to productively puzzle. And that is, you were mentioning kind of that zone before, but productive puzzling is about being in that zone, feeling, first of all, safe enough to enter into the zone, getting into the zone and working within your, the scaffold of what you're able to do, with just that next little bit of challenge, so that we're not moving out of our no, I don't want to say that.
Moving out of our comfort zone, but to the zone of tolerance.
Yes. So I think the analogy in the book we're referring to, which I really like, I think it helps people to visualize this, is opening and closing the window on learning. So when we're referring to opening, this is all really around the nervous system. So if we think of that open window being when our brains are full of blood flowing to all of our different neural pathways in our brain, we have access to everything that our bodies and our minds offer us. And so we are kind of thriving in the ability to be curious and to take risks for learning, and, to make mistakes, all of those things. That's when the window is open. What starts to happen for our students in general, this is not specific to students with challenges with executive function or students on the spectrum or anything else, but what we do know is that when we feel any level of fear, when we do not have a trusting, safe environment, what starts to happen is our nervous system starts to tell us we're not safe. And so what starts to happen, and it happens gradually, this isn't one day, this isn't one incident, this happens over time in school. We hear some criticism that hurts, the window gets closed. The classroom is really loud, it starts to, the window starts to close. We get a bad mark on a test that we studied for, our window starts to close. We can relate this to anything in our own lives. I'm sure we all know when our nervous system starts to shut down, what starts to happen is, thankfully, to help us survive evolutionarily wise, we go into fight, flight, freeze, because we realize, oh my gosh, I am being threatened in this moment, whether that threat be real or not. There are not tigers in these classrooms, but the threat for a student's brain is real. And when we feel that threat, the blood does not flow to our prefrontal cortex where we need it. It doesn't flow to it flows specifically to the parts of our bodies that are going to help us to survive, which is to completely shut down or bolt and run and get out of that situation. And so when your resources are not focused on learning, that's what we're referring to as closing the window on learning. But interestingly enough, we also mention on page 46 of the book that there's actually a sweet spot. I think sometimes what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people get super calm and let's get, really relaxed so that you can access learning. Well, that actually isn't where our brains are best either. We actually need just a little bit of tension. We need just a little bit of, it's that zone where we want just a little bit of we want curiosity. We want a little bit of excitement, maybe. We want a little bit of interest that's the motivation to grapple. If we want you to dig deeper, you're not going to be like completely chill. Oh yeah, let's like really get into this. No, we want just that little bit. So we have like a speedometer in the book, and we want it kind of right here in order to learn. And then of course we can go way over when our systems, when we're in that very either fully scared mode or we're in full anger mode, or, those are of course not going to be helpful for learning either. But I do think it's interesting that I think we try sometimes to get people a little too calm, and that doesn't help us grapple, because grappling requires a little discomfort. That is innate in learning. And if we're not feeling a little bit of discomfort, we already know the answer. We're not being curious. We're not feeling that little, our brain isn't getting sparked and firing when we're not having that little bit of tension to go, I don't know this. And that's the motivation to dig deeper and to grapple and to puzzle. Does that kind of clarify that?
I'm just thinking of an incident recently where I needed to make sure that was happening in a coaching session I had. So, and you're giving me some ideas of how to go back to it and go back in again, because it needs to be gone back into, because it is uncomfortable. But what happens is that often we get into these response habits. We get into these patterns where, okay, well, I just say that's stupid, so therefore I don't have to hear it anymore. And instead of, being willing to open up a bit and say, of all the things that were in that video, is there one idea that, that might be worth looking at again? And it's interesting that to try to get that, because what I see is a habitual response happening.
Well, and and even to help a student to identify and to know this, that's a natural, we're always going to want to feel comfort. That's understandable, and I appreciate that. And there is a time and a place to feel, 100% calm, relaxed, and comfortable. It isn't necessarily when we're trying to learn something, and especially when we're trying to learn something that might be a little tricky or something new. Or so, like, I think there's an example in the book around just the language of when you're introducing a new topic. You start by saying, this is new, and so this is going to feel pretty uncomfortable because you don't know anything about this yet. And it's a hard topic. So just be prepared that there's going to be a little bit of discomfort, and that's okay, because that means that we're starting the learning process, and you are getting smarter when you do this. So helping students to also, or anyone in any situation, I want to keep staying open to all the people who might benefit from this, being able to have that awareness of when things should be comfortable and when it's a good thing to feel a little discomfort. Label it, notice it, naming it, and just taking the power out of the scariness of it is going to help our nervous system to stay in that, parasympathetic state where it can be open to learning.
This is where I grow.
Window, yeah. It just is so counterproductive to try and teach something that's hard and new when our brains are wanting to just shut down and stay into survival mode.
Yeah. Then we know we got to, yeah. So we got to figure out what those thoughts are that's creating that. And is there a thought, is there any wiggle room in those thoughts, so that we can find one that's more useful to learn?
And I think, as you mentioned, little baby step is always the way. What's the smallest thing you would be willing to stay open to learning?
Yeah. Because then we can start a foundation and build on it. But if it's all not anything they're interested in, and that's why we really focus on, okay, what result are you getting that you don't like, that you want to change? And okay, then what are the things you're open to learning about that?
Because and I like that idea. Yeah, when you start with their interests and what they want, again, we're helping to keep the window open because it's not so scary. If you're interested in it, you're much less likely to be scared and having your nervous system start to, increase in terms of the fear of what lies ahead. So starting with interest, using curiosity as your guide, I highly recommend.
I love that feeling. That's one of my favorite ones, that when we do the steer mapping, if I can put curious in that emotion line, lots of options open in the action line. And it's, we just have to find the sentence that helps stimulate that curiosity. Well, I really do want to, whatever it is. And then we can get to curiosity, and then we can start talking about the various actions. So the next question is, how can we help them build resilience when things don't go as planned? Which happens.
Question. I know. And really, resilience is such a buzzword these days. And it is because it is such a valuable characteristic to have. And yet, I think what's missing out there right now that we offer in the flexible mindsets is this idea of, we mentioned flexible mindset feedback on page 75, and the focus is that it's not just about persevering, it's also adding in flexible strategy use. It isn't just about effort. It isn't just about, if you just keep trying, there, again, speaking about equitable education, effort is, first of all, a subjective feeling. You have no idea how much effort anyone is putting into anything.
No.
And we cannot make assumptions around effort and how much is needed for a student in any one area. It's one of those things that if we just say try harder, we aren't actually giving them the strategies that they are going to need in order to try harder. So it's really, in a flexible mindset model, it's perseverance plus flexible strategy use that is the key. So how can I keep going and try something new?
Yeah,
it's the combination of the two that is really key when building resilience. So yes, I want to keep going, but I can't just keep doing, we talk about perseverating, which I think is an important thing. The distinction between, it's interesting how they're spelled the same.
Isn't it?
Perseverate.
I didn't realize that until I read your book.
And they are so different. And what we want to especially help individuals on the spectrum with is that perseverating piece. Mm-hmm. So when do we notice that it's time to quit? When do we know that this what you're doing right now isn't working? And yes, we want you to persevere and keep trying, but we want you to try something different. And that's the key. The more we can continue to say, what else can we try? Which is the key question for complex problem solving. That's going to help us to keep putting effort, doing something different, and learning from that experience, again, with that trial and error approach.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So good. All right. So then the question that comes up is, which questions are best to stimulate creative problem solving? And then which stimulate creativity? I had a little trouble with that when I was trying to apply that with my young adults at home.
Yeah. So, and this was interesting hearing this question, because part of me was like, when Julie and I, in writing the book, we came up to this problem all the time. It's like, oh, does that go in the critical thinking, or does that complex problem solving? Because honestly, they're like this. They whenever we're being creative, we're often thinking critically. We're often having to solve complex. They're a little bit inextricably linked. So it's a tricky question. However, what we ended up doing, which I think really helped us to differentiate when when we'd found some new and interesting research or something we wanted to include in the book, is we had those 3 guiding questions. And for critical thinking, it is, does this make sense? So when you are exploring something, you want to be critical. You want to be continually thinking, does this make sense? And of course, we have lots of examples of different ways to ask that. But when we're talking about complex problem solving, we want to say, what else can we try is the question. It is about looking at doing things differently and finding multiple ways to look at a problem. And then when we're talking about creativity, we're more looking at what are the possibilities. So that's more about imagining. And the imagining piece, so when we're asking questions that are helping students to be creative, we're asking them to think about possibilities. We're encouraging them to imagine something different than what they're experiencing right now. But when it comes to the problem solving, we're actually trying to do things differently. And then when we're being critical thinkers, we're checking in with ourselves through a variety of different questions to see, does what I'm saying make sense? Or does what I'm reading or hearing make sense? Does
So
that
this
kind of clarify the
yeah,
difference?
that definitely helps. This chart sort of summarizes the differences, and you've got 3 strategies under each. How much? We got 10 more minutes.
Well, yeah, it was interesting because those 3 strategies are described in each. So in the critical thinking chapter, we go into details and instructions of how to, do is not, prove
Okay.
it, impossible to grasp. And
That's
there's, there you go. And then in chapter 7, we explicitly give you directions for how to try the strategy of shifting perspectives, through Mix Master, Fork in the Road, and the Mind Reminder. And then in chapter 8, we give you all of the instructions for bending, breaking, and blending, diffuse dreams, and crazy connections. And we're not suggesting that there's only 3 strategies for each, but what I think you'll notice when you look at the instructions, one, it's doing what, again, we're suggesting is helpful for students, is to model first. This is what critical thinking looks like. If you try the is not strategy with somebody and you walk through it, they'll start to understand, oh, that's what it means to be a critical thinker. And yes, there's lots of other things that you can apply these strategies to, but they're really helping students to uncover what does it mean to be a critical thinker, to actually engage in complex problem solving, and to be creative. So it gives them the language. It gives, what we have in the book is also some checklists so that students can do that metacognitive piece for themselves and figure out, to what extent am I a critical thinker, or am I doing complex problem solving, or am I being creative? And then that tool, which I love about a self-awareness tool, is then if there's areas that you don't feel strong, it gives you some insights into where I might want to focus my attention to be able to grow.
Perfect. Well, those, I just highly recommend getting a copy, because I know I'm going to keep referring to it. I'm glad I got the Kindle version, so it's on my phone and handy. For me, that works really well, not for everybody. But I just think this is a nice summary of, okay, this is where we need to go. What these 3 questions, we need to have those at the tip of our tongue when our kids are, our young adults are facing a challenge. And how can we help them pull it apart and figure out what are slow things down, figure out what are some of the options, what's going on, what can we try, what's the little tiniest thing that we're willing to try to see, that incrementality in an incremental way, how can we build it? And this gets back to, we did get 3 more questions yesterday, so I wasn't able to put them in the, actually I might be able to. The first question is, how do you deal with frustrated and discouraged parents? So we have frustrated and discouraged parents who struggle with with any hope of improvement.
Yeah, and it was interesting in these questions that just came in recently. I just noticed there's quite a theme of resistance, and the piece that I will say is really important whenever we're talking about resistance is to think of the nervous system, because where there is resistance, there is fear. And where there is fear, we cannot expect someone who is feeling afraid to be open to change, to be open to hearing what we're going to say. So I think the first step, whenever we're coming up against any type, all of these address these 4 questions all have a level of resistance in them. And where we want to go is we want to meet them where they're at and help them to build that sense of safety, that who I am right now is okay. Let's work on opening that window for learning. Let's build them to a place where they can feel like, now I can hear you, that there might be something else to try. But first, let's reinforce what's helping you to feel safe, what's helping you building those trusting relationships, which we have a whole chapter in the book around building trusting relationships, because that is the fundamental piece that we need to have in place in order for that resistance and the nervous system to be open and receptive. So there's a number of 6 different ways to communicate to keep that dialogue open so that we're helping to keep the resistance low. And that is those types of activities and communicating in a way with the people that we're working with, or the people in our lives, in a way that reinforces that they are okay, that who they are accepted, and that they have strengths, and that they're hearing, back, they're feeling seen and heard by the people in their lives, and that those messages are consistent. It's not, I say one thing and do something else. That's very scary for the nervous system. It doesn't feel like you can trust. So we have a lot of language in there around how to start to help someone's nervous system feel less afraid, so that we can be more open to considering something different, or trying to do something differently.
The skill that we emphasize is listening. When we think about, theoretically, in our conversations, we listen half the time, at least half the time, right? If it's 2 or more people, you got 1/3 of the time that you're talking, and 2/3 where you're listening. And yet that skill is not explicitly taught. But we do that in the Art of Adulting. We explicitly teach what reflective listening is and how to do it. And it's hard, it's uncomfortable to do it at first, because it requires that the listener grab the essence of what they're saying and reflect it back in words to the other person. And that is not something that comes naturally to any of us. We are already thinking about what we're going to say. We're not thinking about, how do I summarize what they're saying? What's the essence of the meaning that they're trying to convey to me? I just think it's it's just the number one partnering skill we have to practice with our kids. That's how we're going to connect with them, is by listening. And I had to teach myself this. My son 5 years ago was in a depression dip with some suicide ideation, and he was telling me the therapist wasn't helping, and I was thinking, well, we got to figure this one out. So we decided to walk together, and we walked for half an hour every day, 5 days a week at the end of the day. And I consciously had to zip my lips and not say anything, and just do the best I could to reflect, so that he could get his thoughts out. And that is so valuable to him, to speak his thoughts. It makes such a difference. And so if we can just let them do that, and then, there would be a triggering something that would trigger me, and it would be like, oh, you can't, he'd say, oh, I'm going to move out, or something, radical. And I was like, yeah, but you're not ready yet. And we'd have all those conversations that were, and I'd have to go back later on and say, I'm so sorry. I reacted to what you were saying. I wasn't as a responsive listener. That's okay, Mom. I know you. It's just, it's horrible. But I was sharing my struggle with him. I was sharing, where I noticed that I was not doing what I said I wanted to do. And I think that that was really helpful. The two of us kept getting closer and closer, and I certainly understood the way his brain worked. So better than I do. Not that I always do, but in that case, I could understand better what he was thinking. So to me, it's the listening and the reflecting skills that are so critical to help my kids feel safe with me.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, those trusting relationships, they are not easy to build sometimes, but they are worth every bit of our time and effort to start there.
Yes, and what a challenge it is to do that. One of Bill Nasson, who runs the autism discussion page, he's a psychologist that has worked for 30 years. He's trying to retire with autistic people. And he says that when dealing with the families of autistic people, he's never seen things so highly emotional. So there's something about that, trying to solve these problems that's just not obvious to us, and it sets us up for those, not responses that are not helpful.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially when we're talking about, I didn't mention this before, when we were talking about feelings, and just to be aware for those individuals who are on the spectrum that, they're fully wired for feelings and empathy. And in fact, I think what gets in the way, and you've mentioned this in some of your other work, I think, is the processing of all of that simultaneously in the moment that is too much. You know, to be empathetic, of course, people on the spectrum are feeling that flood. They're almost feeling too much. They're feeling the flood of emotion for someone else. And in that moment, because we can't simultaneously process all of those complicated feelings, we can't have a response in that moment. And so it may present like we are not having empathy or we're not having a feeling. But in fact, as we learn more about our feelings and as we learn how to be more present with those feelings in the moment, and you know, it's absolutely a skill I think everyone would benefit from learning more about how to be empathetic and respond in the moment in a way that's helpful. But it's so important for people to recognize that understanding of the feelings and the empathy, it just may take more time, and the processing is just really complicated, but it can be done. And it's work worth doing.
Absolutely, because it's a lifelong skill that we all are continuing to get better at. And it will make a difference in the kind of support they get, in the team that's around them, in the workplace, and in any of the significant, you know, important relationships that they have. So yeah, this is, we try it and try it and try it and try it and keep trying it, both at home and when with my clients. So let's just, you know, summarize. Here we are with the flexible mindsets in schools. I just take that schools and I substitute it with home. And I have learned so much from your book, and I really appreciate your time with us. I think you've really given us the essence of it. And I'm looking forward to reviewing the transcription, because that's when it really starts to sink in better with me. I have to see it, hear it twice. So we'll be getting that available to everybody.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for all of these thoughtful questions from your audience. It was fantastic.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yes. Well, thanks. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Great.
Bye for now.